"Who's flying that old piece of junk?" laughed Lieutenant Jake Morrison, watching the weathered Black Hawk flying low over the Arizona desert. The helicopter moved slowly, its faded olive drab paint and visible patches telling stories of decades past. In the control tower, air traffic controller Ryan Peters was growing irritated. "Unidentified aircraft, you are entering restricted airspace. Change frequency immediately and state your intentions." But there was something about that tail number, UH 847219. Tower Supervisor Tom Richardson, a 30-year veteran, paused mid-conversation. That number seemed familiar, very familiar. Then he remembered and his breath caught in his throat. Jesus Christ, is that the Phoenix Recovery Bird? Lisa Morgan, 32 years old with callous hands and her father's determined jawline, was flying her carefully restored UH-60 Blackhawk over the vast expanse of the Arizona desert. The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain below, and the helicopter's rotor wash stirred up small dust devils in its wake. She had spent 3 grueling years rebuilding this helicopter from what most people would consider a hopeless wreck. Every bolt, every wire, every system meticulously restored by her own hands in a hangar she rented with money saved from her job as a civilian flight instructor. The helicopter was undeniably old. Its paint faded from years of desert sun and sandstorms, but it still flew with the solid reliability that had made the Black Hawk legendary. Lisa's heart was beating faster than usual, not just from the pure joy of flying, which never got old, but from the profound emotional weight of being so intimately connected to her father's memories. This wasn't merely a recreational flight. This was a pilgrimage, a way of touching the past and keeping alive the spirit of a man who had meant everything to her. The tail number H847219, painted in regulation black letters along the aircraft boom, was now barely readable after decades of weathering, but was still there, still proud, still defiant. Most people who saw it wouldn't give those numbers a second thought, but for those who knew military aviation history, particularly the classified operations of the early 1990s, those digits carried weight that few could comprehend. Even Lisa had learned the full story only gradually, piece by piece, from old military records, declassified documents, and hushed conversations among graying veterans who remembered when legends were being written in blood and courage. Unidentified aircraft. This is Yuma Approach Control. You are entering restricted military airspace without authorization. Immediately identify yourself, state your intentions, and change to heading 270, came the voice through her David Clark headset. The tone was sharp, professional, with just a hint of irritation that suggested this wasn't the controller's first rodeo with civilian aircraft that had wandered into the wrong piece of sky. Lisa reached for the microphone with the practiced ease of someone who had been flying for over a decade. Yuma Approach. This is civilian helicopter, November 847 Uniform Hotel. Registration Phoenix Aviation. Currently conducting routine maintenance test flight. Requesting permission to transit your airspace en route to Buckeye Municipal. Civilian. Young controller Ryan Peters burst into barely suppressed laughter, keying his microphone to share his amusement with his colleagues. The hangar queen? Sir, that helicopter looks like it belongs in the Smithsonian, not cruising through active military training airspace. Other voices joined in the commentary, though not on official frequencies. In the ready room below the tower, a group of young pilots fresh from flight school were monitoring the radio chatter and adding their own observations. Nothing but old scrap metal held together with prayer and duct tape. Who's this brave soul trying to keep that flying museum airborne? Probably some weekend warrior who bought surplus junk and thinks he's Rambo. Lisa continued flying in professional silence, maintaining her heading and altitude with a precision that had been drilled into her during her own military service years earlier. Just like her father had taught her during countless hours of instruction when she was barely tall enough to see over the instrument panel. Remain calm, stay disciplined, focus on the mission, and never let emotions compromise flight safety. But in the tower behind her, elderly Supervisor Tom Richardson raised his weathered hand in a gesture that immediately silenced the chatter. Tom remembered that tail number. He remembered it very well. "Hold on just a goddamn minute," Tom said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen more aviation history than anyone else in the room. "That tail number? 847219. Are we talking about Phoenix Recovery?" Ryan Peters, who at 26 thought he knew everything there was to know about military aviation, turned his head with confusion written across his face. Phoenix what? Tom, what are you talking about? Tom's fingers, gnarled from arthritis but still quick when it mattered, began dancing across a computer keyboard with urgent purpose. He accessed databases that most of the younger controllers didn't even know existed, drilling down through layers of military records, some still partially classified even after 3 decades. Then he found what he was looking for, and his eyes widened with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Phoenix Recovery Operation, February 15, 1991, during Desert Storm, Tom said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper as the weight of memories settled over him. This helicopter, Jesus Christ, this helicopter belonged to Colonel James Iron Horse Morgan. Ryan's expression shifted from amusement to uncertainty. Come on, Tom. That's got to be just another war story. Half the legends from Desert Storm are bullshit anyway. This one isn't bullshit, son, Tom replied with a gravity of someone who had lived through history rather than just read about it. Colonel James Morgan took this exact aircraft, this UH-847219, and flew it solo 300 miles behind enemy lines in the middle of the worst sandstorm in 50 years. He extracted a 12-man special operations team that had been cut off and surrounded for 4 days, brought them back with his bird shot to hell, running on fumes, flying most of the way back on one engine after taking an RPG hit. The atmosphere in the tower suddenly changed, as if someone had flipped a switch. Other controllers and supervisors stopped their conversations and began gathering around Tom's workstation, drawn by the unmistakable tone of someone recounting something sacred. Even the coffee seemed to taste different as the realization settled over them that they weren't just dealing with some weekend pilot in a restored aircraft. They were looking at a piece of living history. Tom continued, his fingers still working the keyboard as more details appeared on the screen. The mission was so classified that it didn't officially exist for 20 years. No records, no commendations, no public recognition. Just 12 men who came home alive when they should have died in the desert, and one pilot who proved that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being terrified and doing the job anyway. What does the pilot identification say? Asked Senior Controller Maria Santos, who had been listening from her position at the radar scope. Ryan checked the registration records with newfound seriousness. Lisa Morgan? Wait a minute. Morgan? As in, has to be his daughter, Tom said, the pieces falling into place in his mind. Colonel Morgan's little girl, flying her daddy's helicopter. At that moment, everything in the tower stopped. The casual mockery, the jokes about old equipment, the dismissive attitudes, all of it evaporated like morning mist. Lisa, still flying peacefully through the desert air, remained unaware of the transformation taking place in the minds and hearts of the people watching her blip move across their radar screens. Tom reached a microphone, and when he spoke, his voice carried respect that made everyone in the room straighten unconsciously. November 847 Uniform Hotel. This is Yuma Tower Supervisor Richardson. Ma'am, could you please confirm your aircraft registration and pilot identification? Lisa, hearing the change in tone, responded with professional courtesy. Yuma Tower, this is November 847 Uniform Hotel. Aircraft registration confirms UH-60 Alpha, tail number 847219. Pilot in command is Lisa Morgan, commercial rotorcraft rated, former U.S. Army warrant officer. Ma'am, Tom hesitated, feeling the weight of 3 decades of military service behind his words. Are you by any chance related to Colonel James Morgan, U.S. Army? The radio went silent for what felt like an eternity. When Lisa's voice came back, it carried a mixture of pride and deep, abiding sorrow that everyone in the tower could feel. Yes, sir. Colonel James Morgan was my father. Ma'am, Tom said, his own voice thick with emotion, you have unrestricted access to our airspace. Take any route you wish, any altitude you need. It's an honor to have you in our sky. Thank you, Lisa replied, and those listening carefully could hear her voice crack slightly. That means more than you know. But the story was far from over. Word was already spreading through the base like wildfire, carried by radio chatter. text messages, and the kind of rapid communication that happens when something extraordinary touches an ordinary day. From a nearby F-18 training flight, a voice cut through the radio traffic with the crisp authority of someone used to command. Yuma Tower, this is Major Steve Harrison, call sign Viper lead. Did I just hear correctly? Are we talking about the Phoenix recovery helicopter? Affirmative, Major Harrison, Tom replied. This is that aircraft. Harrison's voice, when it came back, carried a reverence that surprised even himself. Tower, please relay to November 847 that Colonel Morgan was my primary flight instructor at Fort Rucker in 1995. That man didn't just save my life during training. He shaped the entire way I think about flying, about leadership, about what it means to be responsible for the lives of others. Lisa listened to her headset, truly understanding for the first time the vast network of lives her father had touched throughout his career. She had known he was respected, had seen the way other military personnel treated him with deference, but she was only now beginning to grasp the full scope of his influence on military aviation doctrine and the personal development of countless aviators. Harrison continued, his voice carrying across the airwaves to anyone monitoring the frequency. November 847, your father didn't just execute Phoenix recovery. That operation fundamentally changed how we think about combat search and rescue. The tactics we use today, the equipment configurations, the crew coordination protocols, half of it traces back to innovations he developed during and after that mission. More voices began joining the frequency, each adding another piece to the mosaic of James Morgan's legacy. Captain Rodriguez from Base Operations. Ma'am, Colonel Morgan trained more than half our current instructor pilots. His techniques for low-level navigation in degraded weather conditions are still taught as the gold standard in our advanced courses. Staff Sergeant Williams from the maintenance section. That helicopter, ma'am, we actually have its complete service history going back to when it was first delivered. What your father accomplished with that bird during Phoenix recovery is still studied in our technical schools as an example of how superior maintenance and pilot skill can overcome seemingly impossible mechanical challenges. Chief Warrant Officer Thompson, monitoring from the flight line. Ma'am, I got 17 years in rotorcraft maintenance, and I can tell you that keeping a bird that old in flying condition is no joke. The fact that you restored operational status tells me you inherited more than just your father's helicopter. You inherited his dedication to excellence. Lisa was becoming overwhelmed by the flood of recognition and respect. She had always known her father was a good pilot, a decorated officer, and a man of integrity. But she was discovering that his influence extended far beyond what she had ever imagined, touching not just individual lives, but shaping the very doctrine and culture of military aviation. Tom pulled out a thick folder from a locked filing cabinet behind his desk. Ma'am, if you're available and willing, we'd very much like the opportunity to show that helicopter to our newest pilots. Most of them have heard the Phoenix recovery stories, but they think they're just legends, the kind of tales that grow in the telling. Having the actual aircraft here, flown by the daughter of the man who made it famous, would be, well, it they'd remember for the rest of their careers. Lisa circled slowly while she considered the request. What would her father say? She could almost hear his voice. Avoid the spotlight. Do your job. Let your actions speak louder than your words. But maybe this time was different. Maybe this wasn't about seeking attention or glory. Maybe this was about honoring the memory of something larger than any one person. I accept your invitation, Lisa said finally. But I want to be clear about something. This isn't my father's story to tell. This is a helicopter story. He was just a pilot who happened to be flying it that day. 45 minutes later, Lisa brought the Black Hawk into a perfect landing on the designated helicopter pad at Yuma Air Base. As the rotor wash settled and the engines wound down, she found herself looking at a scene that took her breath away. What appeared to be half the base had turned out to see the arrival of the Phoenix recovery helicopter. But this wasn't a circus or a photo opportunity. It was something far more solemn and meaningful. Standing in perfect formation were 24 pilots, ranging from fresh-faced second lieutenants to weathered lieutenant colonels with decades of experience. Behind them, maintenance crews stood with their tools set aside, crew chiefs who had worked on countless aircraft but never one with this particular history. Ground support personnel, air traffic controllers, even administrative staff, had found reasons to be present for this moment. Tom Richardson descended from the tower, walking across the tarmac with the measured pace of someone approaching something sacred. His uniform was perfectly pressed, his bearing erect despite his years. And when he stopped in front of Lisa's aircraft, he came to attention and rendered a salute that would have made a drill instructor proud. Lisa shut down the engines completely, removed her flight helmet, and stepped out of the helicopter with the kind of understated dignity that marked her as her father's daughter. She was dressed simply, khaki flight suit, warm but clean, with no insignia except for her commercial pilot wings. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her hands showed the calluses and minor scars that came from years of working on aircraft engines and hydraulic systems. She didn't speak immediately, just nodded acknowledgement to the assembled group with the same quiet humility that had characterized her father's approach to recognition. But everyone present could see the family resemblance, not just in her physical features, but in the way she carried herself, the way she moved with purpose and confidence without arrogance. The first to approach was a young second lieutenant named Michael Chun, fresh from flight school, and so new that his flight suit still had creases from the packaging. His voice shook slightly as he spoke. "Ma'am, I've heard the stories about Phoenix recovery my whole career. Is it really true that your father flew this helicopter back to base on just one engine after taking rocket fire?" Lisa looked at the young officer with the same patient expression her father had used when teaching her to fly. "Lieutenant, this helicopter made it back to base. The pilot just held the controls and trusted the machine to do what was built to do." Major Harrison, who had flown in from his training mission specifically to be present for this moment, stepped forward with obvious emotion. "Ma'am, I want you to know that your father taught me something that has guided my entire career, both in the military and in life. He said, never abandon your people, never abandon your mission, and never abandon hope. This helicopter is the physical embodiment of those principles." Lisa placed her hand on a helicopter's fuselage, feeling the slight vibration that came from metal that had been stressed by combat and restored by love. "Those principles are still here, Major. They're built into every rivet and wire. This machine remembers what it was asked to do, and it's ready to do it again." Colonel Patricia Hayes, the base commander who had been monitoring the situation from her office, arrived on the scene wearing her dress blues rather than her normal duty uniform. As the senior officer present, she could have simply observed from a distance, but she chose instead to personally greet the daughter of a man whose reputation had preceded him into every assignment she had ever held. "Ms. Morgan," Colonel Hayes said, her voice carrying the weight of command while maintaining warmth and respect, "I've been following the situation since you first appeared on our radar. Your father's innovations in combat search and rescue are still classified at levels that I can't discuss in an open forum. But what I can tell you is that Phoenix recovery wasn't just one successful mission. It became the template for every high-risk extraction operation we've conducted for the past 30 years. Lisa felt her throat tighten. I had no idea the impact was that broad. The helicopter maintenance protocols he developed after that mission, Colonel Hayes continued, the crew coordination techniques, the low-altitude navigation systems, the emergency medical procedures for treating casualties in flight, they're all standard operating procedure now throughout the Army. Your father didn't just save 12 men that day. He created the foundation for saving thousands more over the decades that followed. As the afternoon progressed, Lisa found herself giving impromptu tours of the helicopter to small groups of personnel. But rather than focusing on the dramatic elements of her father's story, she concentrated on the technical aspects that made the mission possible: the redundant hydraulic systems, the armor protection, the sophisticated navigation equipment, and most importantly, the maintenance procedures that kept older aircraft operational long after their expected service life. "This bird is old," she explained to a group of maintenance specialists who were examining the engine compartment with professional interest. "But age doesn't mean obsolete. Every system on this aircraft has been maintained to factory specifications or better. The engines have been completely overhauled with modern components. The avionics have been upgraded while maintaining compatibility with the original systems, and the structural components have been inspected and reinforced where necessary." Chief Warrant Officer Martinez, a maintenance expert with 23 years of experience, ran his hands along the engine housing with the reverence of someone who understood the craftsmanship involved. "Ma'am, The work you've done here is museum quality. The attention to detail, the quality of the restoration. This is what we call a labor of love. It had to be, Lisa replied simply. This helicopter earned the right to fly again. The most moving moment came when an elderly civilian contractor approached the group. His name was Robert Bobby Sanders, and he walked with the careful gait of someone whose joints had been damaged by decades of physical labor. What made his presence remarkable was a small pin on his shirt collar, a phoenix rising emblem that only 12 people in the world had the right to wear. "Ma'am," Bobby said, his voice rough with emotion and cigarettes, "I was on Phoenix Recovery, Sergeant Sanders, 3rd Special Forces Group. Your father pulled me out of that desert when I was convinced I was going to die there." Lisa stared at the man, seeing him not as the aging contractor he had become, but imagining him as a young soldier her father had risked everything to save. "Sergeant Sanders, my father mentioned you in his journal. He said you were the one who kept morale up during the 4 days you were surrounded." Bobby laughed, but it was a sound tinged with old pain. "Morale, hell. I was scared shitless the whole time. We all were. But when we heard that rotor signature coming through the sandstorm, when we realized someone was actually crazy enough to come get us, that was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard in my life." He paused, looking at the helicopter with eyes that were seeing more than just metal and machinery. "Your dad landed that bird in conditions that should have been impossible. Visibility was maybe 50 feet, winds gusting to 60 knots, sand so thick you could barely breathe. But he set it down like he was parking in his own driveway." "What was he like during the extraction?" Lisa asked, hungry for details about her father that she had never heard. "Professional," Bobby said without hesitation. "Calm as ice water. While we were loading the wounded, he was already calculating fuel consumption, planning the route back, coordinating with what little air support was available. But here's the thing that really impressed me. Even with all the stress, all the danger, he took the time to check on each of us personally, made sure we were secure, made sure the wounded were as comfortable as possible given the circumstances." Another voice joined the conversation. Master Sergeant Williams, now retired but still working on base as a civilian instructor, had been monitoring the gathering from a distance. "I was part of the recovery team that met you when you landed back at base. I'll never forget the sight of that helicopter coming in, shot full of holes, smoking from one engine, but still flying straight and level." Lisa felt as though she was discovering her father all over again through the eyes of the people whose lives he had touched. He never talked about any of this at home, never mentioned being wounded, never described the combat damage. "That was your dad," Bobby said with a sad smile. "He always said the mission was successful if everyone came home. The details didn't matter." But Williams had more to add. "Ma'am, with all due respect to your father's modesty, the details didn't matter to those of us who studied what he accomplished. The navigation alone was a masterpiece, flying 300 miles through enemy territory with no GPS, no radio beacons, using nothing but dead reckoning and terrain association in conditions where most pilots couldn't see their own instruments. As the sun began to set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Lisa prepared to fly the helicopter back to her home base. But before she could begin her pre-flight checks, Colonel Hayes approached with something in her hands, a small wooden box that looked like it had been crafted with military precision. "Ms. Morgan," the colonel said formally, "this base would like to present you with something. Inside this box is a flag that flew over this installation on the day your father completed Phoenix Recovery. It's been waiting 30 years for the right moment to be presented." Lisa accepted the box with hands that trembled slightly, overwhelmed by the generosity and respect being shown to her father's memory. "Colonel, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Hayes replied. "Just know that your father's legacy lives on here, and this helicopter will always be welcome at this base." As Lisa started the engine for her departure, the familiar whine of the turbines filled the evening air. But this time, the sound carried additional weight. It was a voice of history speaking across the years, connecting past and present in an unbroken chain of service and sacrifice. Tom Richardson's voice came through her headset one final time. "November 847, you're clear for departure on any heading. Fly safe, and know that you're welcome back here anytime." Thank you, Yuma Tower, Lisa. Her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. This has been this honor, but as she lifted off and began her flight home, Lisa discovered that the day held one more surprise. Her radio crackled with an emergency frequency, one reserved for search and rescue coordination. Phoenix Recovery. This is Arizona Search and Rescue Coordination Center. We have an emergency situation. Lisa's training kicked in immediately. Search and rescue. This is Phoenix Recovery. Go ahead with your traffic. We have a civilian aircraft down in the Superstition Mountains. 2 souls on board confirmed alive but injured. Location is beyond the range of our standard rescue helicopters due to altitude and terrain constraints. Weather is moving in from the west, visibility decreasing rapidly. You are the only aircraft currently airborne with the capability to reach them before conditions become impossible. Lisa checked her fuel gauges, calculated distances and flight times, factored in the weather conditions and the challenging terrain of the Superstition Mountains. It would be extremely tight, possibly the most dangerous flight she had ever attempted, but it was doable barely. Search and rescue. Phoenix Recovery copies. Send me coordinates and all available information about the crash site. As the coordinates came through her navigation system, Lisa felt the weight of history settling around her like a familiar coat. Here she was, in her father's helicopter, being called upon to do exactly what he'd done throughout his career, risk everything to bring people home safely. She banked the helicopter toward the mountains, increased power to maximum continuous rating, and settled in for what she knew would be the flight of her life. Behind her, Tom Richardson watched the radar blip disappear into the darkening sky, saying a prayer for the daughter who was carrying on her father's legacy in the most direct way possible. The rescue was successful. 2 hours later, Lisa landed at a hospital in Phoenix with 2 injured hikers who owed their lives to her skill, her courage, and a 30-year-old helicopter that had once again proved that some machines are built not just to fly, but to serve something greater than themselves. 6 months later, a memorial was dedicated at Yuma Air Base. Phoenix Recovery UH 847219, in honor of all who serve and in memory of those who gave everything so others might live. The inscription continued, Colonel James Morgan and crew. Some gave all gave some, and legends never die. Lisa continues to fly her father's helicopter, but now she's not alone in her mission. She has become part of the Arizona Search and Rescue Network, volunteering her aircraft and skills for emergency operations throughout the Southwest. The helicopter that once saved 12 soldiers in the Middle Eastern desert now saves hikers, hunters, and anyone else who finds themselves in danger in the American wilderness. And in the maintenance logs, a new tradition has begun. After each successful rescue, the crew chief adds a simple notation. Legacy continues. Mission accomplished.